Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a mini review of all of the handhelds that I own, because I'm crazy, and we're not going to do anything in depth, just kind of a paragraph or two, and so you can get an idea of all of the handhelds that I own, because it's not just what's behind me, I have a whole bunch more. So we'll look at them all. No, I am not going to count, because I don't even want to know the number, but we're going to go through them all. On top of that, we're going to start with the corporate consoles, so Nintendo, Sony, all of that sort of thing first, and then we'll jump into all of the normal retro handhelds that we know, Anbernic and Retroid and all that sort of thing. So we'll start off with the corporate ones first. First up, my atomic purple Game Boy Color. This is not my original Game Boy Color from when I was a kid. I just rebought this a few months back because I missed having one. My original one was teal, and I really love that color. I miss having my original DMG Game Boy though. That was my very first video game device that I ever owned, and I don't really know what happened to it, but it doesn't seem to exist anywhere anymore. I don't really use this Game Boy Color, it's just a novelty shelf device nowadays, and I don't want to mod it or anything like that. I want the original experience just to sit there and look pretty, and occasionally I'll just pick it up and just see how far we've come because it's crazy to see that. Next up is my Game Boy Advance, which is the same idea as the Game Boy Color. I grabbed this a few months back just due to nostalgia, but I don't use it and I'm not going to mod it. My Game Boy Advance SP is much of the same, but the SP is actually mine from when I was a kid. You can see the torture that it's been through. It's seen some war. It's very interesting to see how bad these screens are nowadays compared to back then, because we didn't know any better and all the screens were really good back then, but you look at it now and you're like, how was I even able to play a game on this? Somehow my eyes did it, and we're here nowadays with me wearing some glasses. But the battery on this SP and all of Nintendo devices are just insane. I don't remember charging this device and somehow it still boots up and everything is fine. My PSP 3000 is next, and it's a similar story. I bought this maybe 6 months or so now, as I didn't own a PSP growing up, and I can't remember anybody that I knew owning one. So it really wasn't something that I had exposure to. I tried it out for a bit, and tried some emulation on it and all of that, but it's just not for me. No nostalgia or really anything to cling on to. And no, I'm not going to do a I bought a PSP in 2024 video and these are my thoughts, because those are almost as bad as when a creator puts honest review in their title. Pet peeve of mine, not doing it. Then we have my Nintendo DS Lite, and this is actually one that I don't remember owning as a kid. We have the DS, and I still do, in red, but it's not here with me. I grabbed this one a few months back just to see what it was like, and I really do like this a lot. Replace the screen, and I think this would still be a great handheld in 2024. But once again, I want it original. I really like the DS Lite, and I wish there was more that I could do with it nowadays, but man, it's great. Then we get to the 3DS, and I absolutely love my 3DS, and I still play it to this day. This is the new 3DS that I got off of a Black Friday sale when they were clearing them out many years ago, and it had the Mario design on it or something, that's all I remember. Instantly bought the Blastoise faceplate and I threw it on. I think this might be my favorite handheld out of all of them for looks. The Blastoise design just gives me huge nostalgia, since Pokemon Blue was the first game that I ever remember purchasing. It started my love for Pokemon that has continued throughout all of these years, and you can see that by all of the Squirtles that I have in my house. But the 3DS still just works for me. There's no retro achievement, so I don't have that bug, and emulation, while good, still isn't perfect. The 3DS is still the best way to play 3DS games. Simple. The PlayStation Vita. This is my 4th or 5th Vita at this point. I always get the bug to buy one, and then I always get the bug to sell it because it just sits there and I don't use it. The only time I can remember using one for a long period of time was when I went to Japan a few years back, and I bought a blue one, and I ended up playing through the entire Persona 4 Golden on it, and that was basically it. After that, it kind of sat there and I got rid of it, and now I have it all over again. If you want my controversial take on the Vita, here it is. I wish it had Android. It might still be relevant to this day because the hardware is still great, but the software is really tough to do anything with. And if it had Android, we might be able to do something with it. It's still a great device, don't get me wrong, but there just isn't anything here for me, especially on the games front, since pretty much all of them can be played elsewhere. Switch is next, and I've had 3 different Switches, but for different reasons than the Vita. I had the original Switch, which I hacked, then I bought a modded OLED Switch, which I have here, and then just recently, thanks to AliExpress, I snagged a Switch Lite Pokemon model, modded for $190 US. I think the Switch and Switch Lite get slept on a lot for emulation purposes. If you throw Android on here, you get a ton of power. But even with just the regular operating system, you can do quite a bit with a modded Switch. I fully enjoy using cheats, backing up saves, and all of the benefits of a modded Switch that it provides me. And while I love the OLED Switch, I'm really starting to enjoy the form factor on the Lite. Both are great, and if the Switch Lite ends up getting an OLED mod, as expected, it's going to be a tough decision for me on which one I'm going to be using more. I'm putting the Steam Deck OLED here as I have no idea where it goes. Look, I both love the Steam Deck OLED, and I'm quickly looking to get rid of it. It's a very simple scenario for me. It's great, but Linux is not for me, and 800p is starting to really show its age. But the rest of it is just fantastic. The OLED screen, the low wattage performance, battery life, and all of that is fantastic. But once again, not Windows. And since I only want to carry around one x86 device, it has to be Windows. The upcoming Asus ROG Ally X will likely be replacing this really quickly, since the Ally is my favorite of the x86 devices amongst all of them. But the battery life and comfort were a big issue on the original Ally, and it seems like the X solves both of those. Or hopefully, I'll know soon. Either way, the Steam Deck OLED is great, but it's just not Joey great. Okay, so let's jump into all of my newer retro handhelds, the Anbernics, the Retroids, and all of that. Starting with the Anbernic RG280V. I have 2 of these. One with a ripped off faceplate, and the other with the ugly bronze and red. One thing that you might notice as we start to get to the newer Anbernic handhelds is the older ones had such care put into them. The 280V is one of my favorite handhelds in my collection as a micro, tied with the TrimUI Smart. If it had Wi-Fi like the Smart does, and a bit more power, I would be using it constantly. It's such a fantastic device. It feels great, the buttons feel great, and it's an entire package, but I just don't trust current Anbernic to make a successor on this properly. But I wish they would at least try. And in that exact same breath, we have the much beloved Anbernic RG351P. It's almost the exact same word for word as the RG280V. This was my very first handheld that I used soldering on to get Wi-Fi added in, and I did it perfectly. I look at this and then I look at something newer like the RG35XX H, and it's such a clear decline in quality in my eyes. Personally, I would murder for a newer RG351P with Wi-Fi built in and a better processor with the same 3:2 aspect ratio screen. I don't know why it's so difficult to find a good 3:2 device, but I might have to settle for that upcoming Ayaneo Pocket Micro, which is looking to be just that, but on a doctor's salary. The 351P using GPSP can do all of GBA, but you have to use GPSP to do so, which isn't a big issue, but it's just in 2024, it's kind of an outdated thing. But man, do I really love the 351P. I have no idea when the TrimUI Smart released, but I'm putting it here. This is and continues to be one of my favorite micro handhelds, even if I don't tend to use micro devices a lot. It has Wi-Fi, it has good software, and the buttons and D-pad feel great. I really like this handheld, and if I wanted something to just carry around with me that was tiny, it would be this. It's lacking a lot in power, which is unfortunate, and maybe they'll release a successor with some upgrades, But otherwise, this is just a charming little device. Once again, no idea where this fits in the timeline, but we have the Miyoo Mini here. Or, as I like to call it, the device I only keep because it has one of the best colors out of any handheld devices that have released. Seriously, this ice blue is just the entire reason that I have one. I'm not a huge fan of it otherwise, I find it to be a very cramped device and all that sort of thing. Plus, I very much prefer the Miyoo Mini Plus over this, except, well, the color, again. It's kind of amazing to me that a company can release a device like this with an awesome blue color and then never do it again. However, judging by the recent A30 from Miyoo, I don't know if the Miyoo that made the Mini and Mini Plus even exists anymore. Throwing the Analogue Pocket in here, and I've said it many times, but I love the Analogue Pocket. I know that this is a controversial device. Everybody hates the company and how they sell this and how they release them, and I am in very much full agreement. I even talked about it at length in my review, but the actual device, which definitely is a niche device for a lot of people, is just absolutely fantastic. One of the best that exists in our hobby. Everybody thinks it's just the screen, and 90% of it is, but the sound and audio is great as well. Plus, the input latency and how games feel is another huge benefit. I know the cool thing nowadays is to grab the dollar store FunnyPlaying GBC Kit and compare the two because of pricing, but to me, there is absolutely zero competition. The Analogue Pocket is the best vertical you can buy with your money today, and it's a device that I absolutely love. I don't have an original Anbernic RG280M here. Apparently the buttons and D-pad have been swapped, and maybe something else, but look at that stunning color. They just don't do colors like these anymore. This stands out. I bought it specifically for the design and color, but the feel of it is just fantastic as well. The metal feels nice and it's curved, and while I haven't used this device a lot, it's been more of a shelf ornament. It's just once again another example of what I miss about the old Anbernic. And I wasn't even around for the old Anbernic. Did I miss the glory days for designs for handhelds? Then we come to one of my favorite retro handhelds in my collection, out of everything that I own, and it's the Anbernic RG353P. The P specifically thanks to the SNES design, but I have the purple PS here as well. I was screaming last year for Anbernic to make an RG353P with a T618 chip like the RG405M. I would be set beyond belief with that combination. I have a massive love for my Super Nintendo and Super Nintendo games, and this design just evokes a feeling of nostalgia with it, and the games play absolutely fantastic on here as well. I break this out from time to time just to play on because of how great it feels, and I really hope that we see a successor at some point for this because I consider this to be one of the best retro handhelds that we have. The Anbernic RG353M is next, and this is entirely only in my collection because I kept hearing about how great it is and I wanted to try it out. Plus it's in blue. In reality, this handheld just isn't for me. The color is fantastic and the metal feels great, and so do the buttons and everything, but it's cramped city every time I try and use it. I know that this device has a cult following, and I can see why it's beloved, but it's just not for me. Looks great on the shelf though. Hey look, it's the Anbernic RG35XX. The original, not the remake, not the remaster, not the 2024 model, and all of that. This is the original one with Garlic OS 1.4.9 installed. I did an RG35XX versus Miyoo Mini Plus video a long time ago, and I concluded that even though the Miyoo had Wi-Fi with retro achievements, I very much preferred the 35XX. Well, not too long after that video, my mind changed and the Miyoo Mini Plus became my go-to vertical for a long while. But I always like going back to this original 35XX. There is something here that just feels good about using it. Call it build quality or call it something else, but I think Anbernic made a very big mistake by not releasing a Wi-Fi version of this a lot sooner. And I really mean just adding Wi-Fi. That's all they had to do. I'm pretty sure the Miyoo Mini Plus came right after the 35XX. I honestly can't remember, but it doesn't matter. The Miyoo Mini Plus was and is just a fantastic handheld, and it's made complete thanks to the Onion OS team. It's the right price, had the right colors except no blue, the right level of modding, the right community support, the right software, Wi-Fi for retro achievements, one of, if not the best, D-pads in my personal opinion, and fantastic buttons to match. Look, I have gushed and gushed and gushed about my Miyoo Mini Plus over the last year, and that's not going to change. It deserves all of the praise in the world, and you should own one. Everybody should own one. Even now, it's still better than the recent 35XX Plus, in my eyes. I don't remember when the Retroid Pocket Flip released, but I remember not being interested, then severely not being interested when the hinge issues came out, then getting interested over time, to buying it, absolutely loving it, breaking it a few days later trying to swap the buttons for Skittles, and instantly buying a new one at full price off of Retroid's website. The Flip has been the handheld that I bring everywhere with me, which might stop being the case nowadays. It's the one that I've always had on me for basically the entire past year. It's not a perfect handheld, but it has been the most perfect of perfect handhelds for my daily life. It's small since it's a clamshell, but it opens to a massive screen. It can play whatever I want within reason, with the cap being some GameCube and PS2 and all of that. It runs Android, so I can do all of my save syncing. And I don't know what it is about the Flip, but it's just a top tier device to me. I love it, and I hope we see a Flip too. The handheld that I once called King of Handhelds, the Anbernic RG405M. Did you know that this was my second retro handheld ever? First was an Anbernic RG353V, which I wasn't super impressed with, but man, the RG405M blew me away. 4-inch screen, T618 processor, Android, comfortable, metal. This was the entire package, and once you put Gamma OS on it, it's even better. Nowadays, it's been eclipsed heavily by the Retroid Pocket 2S, even with myself preferring the metal 2S over it, but at the time, the 405M was a peak handheld to me. I think this is the last handheld that feels the most like the older Anbernic handhelds do for quality and everything. And it's also the last Android handheld by Anbernic that received any over-the-air updates. Let that sink in for a bit. The 405M will always have a special place in my collection. Retroid's Pocket 2S ended up taking a very high spot on my 2023 best of list. And then they released a metal version, which actually ended up being a better handheld than the original plastic one. Pricing obviously doesn't make sense for a lot of normal people, but I had to have it. Look, the 2S still to me is the best handheld that you can purchase for under $100 US. There is zero competition in my mind. I still firmly believe that any newcomer should buy this as their first handheld, or at the very least the plastic version of it. It has fantastic hall sticks, analog triggers, fantastic buttons, one of the best D-pads in the hobby, the power to play all of Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, but even some GameCube and so on. The one single issue with this device for most people is the 3.5-inch screen. But aside from that, this is a fantastic handheld through and through, and one that I go back to quite a bit because of my love for it. More of this, Retroid, please. I guess we can talk about the Anbernic RG Nano here. I have an RG Nano. It's too small. I bought it to write a guide for. The blue is nice. That's about it. Let's move on. The Anbernic RG ARC is next, and I have the D here, but I don't have a preference towards either the D or the S. I think the blue S looks awesome, and I think this one here looks great too. The RG ARC is a very weird device to me. First, it made me respect fighting games in a way that I just never did before, and the D-pad makes it super enjoyable as somebody who wasn't a Sega kid. There's a ton of comfort and it feels great to hold, and there's a nice big 4-inch screen. But it just didn't seem to catch on, and it really didn't sell well. I won't say that I hold a love for this device at all, as I really don't, but I think it's a good device that will forever be slightly underrated. It's also just massively big, which likely didn't help and should have probably had a T618 or better chip inside of it. The Ayaneo Pocket Air is a super interesting device to me, as like I said in my video for it about a month ago, it should have released at a lower price point, and even now, it should be a lower price. It's a really fantastic device that's definitely not perfect thanks to software, but it's one that found a home here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's going to stay here for a long while. It has for 2 months, but it's already moved off of my coffee table. However, I would 1000% be looking at one of these over both of the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro and the Anbernic RG556 if I was in the market, and I had a budget cap of where these devices sit. It's just better. The AYN Odin 2. I am not sure what more I can say about this handheld. It is fantastic, it's great, it's awesome, it's everything I wanted an Android handheld to be, and more. I have had 3 of these at this point. I've had my review unit, then I bought the transparent blue, and then I settled on the rainbow model here. Until the Mini, which is basically this, but smaller, there is just nothing better than the Odin 2s. The power to run whatever you want on Android, the battery to last forever, sticks and D-pad are fantastic, software is great, and so much more. I have done so many videos on this device because of how good it is, so I don't want to drag this out, but the Odin 2 is just a top tier device that you buy once and you cry once, and then you forget all the other handhelds exist or are releasing because it doesn't matter anymore. The TrimUI Smart Pro is next here, and boy oh boy did this handheld go through some roller coasters. I love this handheld from day one, made a video about loving it. It is the best option for Game Boy Advance in its price point, which nowadays is like $50 US. Other reviews came out and they fumbled with the power save functions, fumbled with a few other things, and it got dealt a really bad hand at launch. Nowadays, everybody wants one, especially thanks to the work that has been done on the firmware side. Still a top tier device in my mind for comfort as well. It feels great, and while the sticks aren't great and neither are the triggers, everything else is. Glad to see that everybody's coming around on this, even if it took a little while. We come to the Anbernic RG35XX Plus next, and I am not going to lie here, it exists in my house because the community likes it, and they want guides for things to do on it. It's not for me. It doesn't hold any of the charm the original 35XX has, despite being on paper everything that I wanted the 35XX to be. I just think it took too long. I still prefer my Miyoo Mini Plus over this, and a lot of that has to do with Onion OS, but I also prefer the RGB20SX over this too. When the 35XX Plus came out, stock was bad, real bad, and that put me off of the device completely, and I haven't really recovered since. I don't know what it is. This feels so mechanical and lifeless compared to previous Anbernic releases, and that likely won't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but it does somehow to me. The Retroid Pocket 4 Pro is right up next, and this is the second 4 Pro that I've owned. I had the review unit, which at launch had all sorts of problems, and that turned me off of the 4 Pro completely. I want to say that this new unit has a different screen. It seems to be much clearer than I remember the 4 Pro being, and I wonder if they made some changes on the hardware side for it, because I know they did on the software side, but it never looked as good as this does. Otherwise, my thoughts haven't changed at all. The 3 Plus and the 4 and 4 Pro series of Retroids are just not for me. They're not very comfortable, like at all, and I find that I need a grip on them to have any sort of comfort. Plus, I just find the D-pad to be in the wrong spot here. After getting the Odin 2 Mini in, while at a completely different price point, it's killed any thoughts that I had about keeping or letting the 4 Pro stick around in here. Right now, it's only been here because of my laziness. I still think it's a great handheld for a lot of people, but it's just not for me. The Anbernic RG35XX H is much of the same as the 35XX Plus for me. These came out in quick succession. I had and I have the same complaints for both. When I look at the 35XX H compared to the 353M, or the 351P, or the 280M, or any of the older Anbernics, it just doesn't seem to hit the right notes for me. It's a device that, on paper, should be exactly what I want, as I was screaming for a horizontal Miyoo Mini Plus last year, or something similar. But it just ends up being another device that I own, and only because the community likes it. I don't think they're bad devices, they just didn't move the needle for me. And like I said before, it feels like a mechanical release with no love really put in. The FunnyPlaying GBC Kit is up next, and this is going to be short. I hate this thing. Everything about it. The plastic is cheap, the buttons and D-pad are cheap, the software is awful, the game compatibility with carts is awful, the thing is extremely buggy, and I am just not interested one bit in this device. The only reason it is still here is because I have been too lazy to throw it in the garbage. The RGB20SX and the Analogue Pocket completely blow this out of the water, and this will never be on any recommendation list from me ever. It is garbage. I think the GKD Pixel fits right here in the timeline. Who knows, the timeline is jumbled, don't hate me. I have no love for this device at all. It is only in my house because it looks nice on the shelf. That is as good a praise as I can give it. The software is atrocious, and they aren't fixing it. There's audio issues, there's frame rate issues, there's heat issues, and there is so much more that was not covered in a lot of different reviews. I don't and won't understand any love for this handheld at all. It was a complete miss. Looks and feels great before turning it on though. One device that did move the needle for me was the Anbernic RG556. It has an OLED screen. Not much else to say, and it plays a decent amount of the higher end libraries for GameCube and Wii and PS2 and all of that. With some tweaks, of course. This is the winner on my list for most comfortable device that I own, and it is not even close. The blue transparent plastic, the ergonomics, all of it is so very comfortable. It's a shame that they still haven't fixed the sticks. I actually don't think they've released a single update for this at all, whereas I remember the RG405M at least got some over-the-air updates. I think you're starting to see a theme here with the current Anbernic. However, I do think that I'm going to eat my words about the 556 being the best handheld of 2024. I might have been a little bit rash with that one. I'll admit it. The Powkiddy RGB20SX is up next, and I absolutely love this. It is mostly due to the form factor. I miss using a good vertical device, and none of them, bar the Analogue Pocket, have a good screen. But with that being open FPGA without retro achievements, it's not always my go-to device. The 20SX quickly became my go-to vertical device, and while it's not perfect, it's something that I've tended to use a lot more lately for Game Boy and Game Boy Color. The blue is fantastic, it uses ArcOS, which is great, and I just wish they would have fixed the D-pad. Powkiddy could do a lot better on their releases as well. I just did a review on the Anbernic RG280XX, which is just not for me. The buttons are too small. The device size is okay, it's fine, and the comfort is fine, but it really comes down to the small D-pad and the small buttons, plus the lack of Wi-Fi. This is again completely a scenario of a device that stays here because of community popularity, and not because I like it. It just does nothing for me. I just did a review on the Miyoo A30. You can watch that for my thoughts. Any more time wasted on this device in its current state is time that I'll never get back. But then we come to the Anbernic RG35XX SP. Remember my Game Boy Advance SP? Well, this tickles all of my nostalgic funny bones. I love this handheld. The clamshell, the games it can play, Wi-Fi for retro achievements, the precise D-pad and buttons, and all of it. The stock software is still unfortunately not great, and we can count on custom firmware like Miyoo OS to solve those issues, but this has easily become one of my favorite Anbernic devices. I can also fully realize that it is completely the form factor that's making the difference here. Nostalgia is one hell of a drug, and I am high on it with this device. Like I said in my review, I firmly believe that this needed to be Android, or they had to put in the work to solve the sleep issues, because right now, as good as it has been a fight with my Retroid Pocket Flip for daily usage. The GPD Win 4 is next on our list, and most recent to come out with the 2024 model. Once again, just recently reviewed this, so I'm not going to rehash it all, but this is 100% a stopgap device for me, like the Deck OLED is, until the Asus ROG Ally X comes out. As good as the Win 4 is, it's not my specific device for my use cases, and the Ally X is sure looking to be all of that and more. I think if you want the smallest, most portable, and beefy x86, the Win 4 would be for you. However, it's at a very high price premium compared to other x86 devices. Lastly, we come to the AYN Odin 2 Mini. Still using my review unit here with the non-final mold, waiting for my White Pro model to ship. The Mini has taken over for my Odin 2. I talked about it in my review, but it is a smaller Odin 2, and to me that is exactly what I needed. I love this thing, it is absolutely fantastic. I have been throwing it in my pants pocket and walking around the house, bringing it with me shopping. I just had to wait at IKEA for 30 minutes or so for a return, and I pulled this out, connected it to my phone's hotspot, and just kept playing and earning retro achievements while out on the go. The Mini is just perfection. The screen is beautiful, the size is great, the D-pad is just absolutely fantastic, and so are the sticks, and obviously the power of a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. So I can really just play anything I want. I have been eagerly waiting for Dolphin to implement retro achievement support for GameCube, and that's coming soon, and all of that will be happening on the Mini. I've consolidated a lot of devices that used to be on my coffee table thanks to this release, and it makes me excited to see what's coming next. So, as a nice quick little wrap up, these are the devices that I keep on my coffee table within arm's reach, because I likely confused a lot of you by saying coffee table a lot in this video. Basically just means these are the ones that I have within my arm's reach because I'm usually on the couch and I can just grab a device to play. So going in order here, we have the Anbernic RG35XX SP, which very easy and portable, and it is currently battling with my Retroid Pocket Flip. And I just can't decide between the two. This has Android and is so much easier to sync some saves, but this feels great too. So it's a very hard decision between the two. Then we have my new 3DS, which obviously I play 3DS games with, and it just looks so beautiful, so I have to have it. My AYN Odin 2 Mini is next, and waiting for my white version to come in, but until then, this plays everything. This is my most used device by far, just like my Odin 2. It just, whatever I want to play on it, I play on it. And that happens to be a lot of Game Boy Advance lately, but also I've started dabbling into a lot of PlayStation 2. So I'm doing quite a bit with this. Then we have my two verticals, and I use both of these for two different reasons. There is the Powkiddy RGB20SX and the Analogue Pocket. I use this when I want to get some retro achievements and just play some Game Boy and Game Boy Color and things like that. And then I'll use this for any games that I have already retro achievements in, and I just want to play because the screen is fantastic and all that sort of thing. So I kind of go between both of them, and it's probably going to stay that way, where both of them are going to exist on my little shelf here. And then we have my x86 devices, the GPD Win 4 right here, and my Steam Deck OLED. And like I mentioned before, the ROG Ally X is likely going to knock both of these off. I just don't need two different devices to do what one does. But right now I use both of these for two different reasons. I use the GPD Win 4 for a lot of more demanding games, things where the Steam Deck just can't keep up. And then I use the Steam Deck for a lot of indies and low wattage games and all of that sort of thing. So they're kind of doing different functions at the moment, but that's not going to last very long. And so that's going to be it for this one. I hope you liked the video, and I know it's longer than most expected, but it hopefully gives you some insight into the collection that I have and how I use them or how I like them and all that sort of thing. I am very curious. Let me know what your coffee table devices are, and it doesn't have to be a coffee table, but I mean the devices that you use the most, the ones that are always within arm's reach, the ones that you just can't live without. So let me know what your list looks like. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord and we can talk about all the retro handhelds. Support me on Patreon if you like my stuff, and hope you all have a good one.